Thanks to GE first to start. Maybe just thank you for the conference. Honestly, these conferences have always been good. I've come to them now for probably close to 12 years, and the best thing about it is connecting with people. So I think you do it well, and let everybody talk and be pretty open about the pros and cons and positives and negatives. So I think I love that conversation this week. So. And you also provide content that is thought-provoking, and I think some of the guest speakers and keynotes have definitely done that for everybody here this week. So I want to do some introductions. So first to start, my name is Patrick McBride. I work for Nova Scotia Power. Nova Scotia Power is a utility in the east coast of Canada. We are part of another family called Emera, who owns other assets across North America and into the Caribbean. And with me today, I have two other people as a part of my team. I'll start with Yusuf. Yusuf's on my team as an asset management technology specialist. And I have Jason McFadgen here as well with me, who's our technical lead. Again, we're in the east coast of Canada. We're a peninsula off the coast, and we're linked to by an undersea cable to Newfoundland, who's the northeast, and then to New Brunswick, who's left of us here. So like geographically is kind of where we're at. In our company, we're a vertically integrated utility. So that means we generate the power, we transmit the power, we distribute the power, and we also manage the bulk electrical system. So in our generation fleet, we have 12 traditional steam units across 6 different locations, which burn a mix of coal, pet coke, natural gas, and oil. Along with that, we have 2 simple cycle plants that are connected through a heat recovery boiler, and we have roughly about 30, a mix of small and large hydro across the province. We also have wind, who's kind of taken over the world, I think, for our side of the country for sure. So with the generation, this is the transmission system across the province. It connects the province. It's roughly about 5,400 kilometers of line and structures, which I think translates 3,300 miles maybe. And then I think with that, we distribute the power across about 27,000 kilometers, which is about 16,000 miles of line and feeders across the province. Connected to those would be also transmission substations. We have roughly about 308, I think, major transmission substations across the province, and there's probably a number I can't count on the distribution side. Some of those substations we're converting and including some battery, grid storage battery, as a part of the projects to get to green in 2030. But that gives you a sense, hopefully, of the size of the organization and where we're at. So I'm going to try to take you through a little journey that's taken that decade, and I'll try to get to some good content related to APM shortly, but I think it's important to kind of anchor to the why of why are we using APM and what problems is it helping us solve. And I think it starts all the way back to 2008, and I might have mentioned it yesterday in the forum, but in about 2008, Pass 55 came out, or around that time. Pass 55 was a precursor to ISO 55000, and that was the impetus for us to kind of think about running the business differently, and it kind of made us start to think about the challenges that were ahead. And the challenges probably aren't that dissimilar for any other power utility out there, which is the changed utilization of our fleet, stewarding units to retirement, a demographic shift within our organization where people with 30, 35 years experience were retiring, and we had to capture some of that knowledge before it walked out the door. And we always have an increasing level of scrutiny and transparency needed on our decision making. So we are a regulated utility, and we're also accountable to our shareholders and our customers. So in the business case around asset management, we had to talk about how we were going to solve these things. And how we were going to sustain our performance, because we have had good historic performance within our organization, and how we were going to improve proactive decision making to help hit the mission of that sustaining performance. So we designed a scope of asset management that was, I think, holistic. It was a precursor to any software we'd ever considered. So we had to start with what was the plan and what things we were looking to achieve, or what maybe frictions were in the way of us having success along the way. So within that scope, we said we were going to talk about process redesign, so things related to our work management, how we execute work, what reliability programs were we going to focus on that was going to help us hit the mission, and then how are we going to change the way we think and make decisions and produce risk-based profiles for us to lead into the future. We talked about what technologies we were going to use along the way, and then we also had our eye on the sustainment of performance. So with that, there's a bit of a legendary picture within our organization called the Asset Management Pyramid. And this has been around since 2009 within our organization. And if you've ever seen a Nova Scotia Power slideshow, you've probably seen this in history for sure. But it captures about 40 elements of asset management that really represent our philosophy and approach to business transformation. So we started at the bottom. We started talking about those things, those friction items that would get in the way of us having success as we get further up into the pyramid. Some call it a triangle, but it's not. There's roles and there's technology on the other sides. You just can't see those right now. But these elements describe things like equipment database. So we had to make sure we had a standard equipment database. How we were executing work had to change across the organization so that we could measure it in a consistent fashion. We had to talk about things like grounds that we were doing on paper and try to introduce an electronic logbook so that we could harvest information to maybe feed into some of our GAA data so that it could be augmented with a bit more information intelligence. And as we worked up the pyramid, we get into things like maintenance strategies, reliability teams I'll touch on a little bit, preventative maintenance activities across the fleet. We talked about anomaly detections and reporting and KPIs to support the business decision making, rolling it all the way up into strategic asset management, which is really the kind of holy grail of the whole thing. So then we kind of relate that back to where does GE fit in this picture? And it's quite a bit. You could almost circle the whole thing really, but this is where we kind of leverage APM across that pyramid. So it helps us with the transformation of data at a foundational level. So we pull in equipment records and work history details and other conditional data that's important for feeding up into the pyramid. The other thing that's important to state is independently, every one of those elements on their own can stand by themselves as a value to the business. Together, they're exponentially valuable. So connecting your rounds program to your PDM program and providing that insight back in is compounding on the value. So the other way to represent this is through GE's lens. And this is kind of what we have for packages related to the GE APM platform, if that helps. So we do use asset strategy management. We use the health pillar holistically, pieces of reliability and performance. We definitely leverage the accelerators and policies within the program. And foundation is pretty much just baked in through everything that we do. So I had to highlight that whole thing. So I mentioned reliability teams, and I threw this slide in a little bit last minute. It's a terrible slide because it's all words, but the whole purpose of this is the conversations I've had over the last couple of days talks about sustainability. And I think that what organizations, or at least some of the ones that I've talked to have said is that it's difficult to sustain the programs over time. And this is a conscious decision for us back in the day to create these teams. The use of fleet asset class reliability teams is an approach that harnesses the best people in our organization to collaborate in their areas of expertise, to have their knowledge committed to process and the benefit of the entire organization. This process maximizes the use of internal and external expertise to create standards, processes, and programs that improve performance and reliability. Reliability teams also function as champions. Asset management is key to sustaining the asset management processes. So I think in general, that's what it is for us. These teams are critical for the future and the decision making and the sustainability of all the stuff that we do. So, and it just talks about the accountabilities really, and I'll get into that in a second. So we have several of these across the business. These are the reliability programs we would have representing power production. We have an electrical team, generator team. You can probably read that slide, but specific areas of focus that allow us to look at componentized or different streams of risk in a common way. So these help us look at risk consistently across the fleet. Similarly, we have that across our T&D or energy delivery teams. So we have a distribution and a substation team, and same thing. It's just a collection of people, maintenance and operations staff, reliability engineers, and asset management professionals coming together to talk commonly about those challenges related to their specific area of expertise. So that is the way we sustain asset management in our organization. So then the reliability team's focus is really when they meet, and at the onset of asset management for the organization, teams met all the time. Like it was just probably monthly or a couple times monthly. And I get that organizations struggle to kind of commit that much time up front because everybody has day jobs. So these people are still plant people at the core, and we need to let them run operations, of course. But the pain that you take, that little bit of time that it takes up front pays dividends in the long run for sure. And so these teams now only meet probably twice a year, whereas once they were meeting probably a couple times a month. So it does pay off. And what we did is we tried to focus their attention on maintenance strategies, producing a multi-year investment plan for their asset classes, technology reviews, so anything that was emerging that was either disruptive or going to help potentially at managing the risks in the future, training requirements that we might have had to do. Are we going to end up with new types of skill sets we need across the business and introduce that as a risk? And then at the end of the day, producing those risk profiles to help inform our investment strategies. All along the way, standardizing as much as we can. But I just thought I'd talk about a little bit of the organizational structure. So we talked a lot this week about the force and the driving strategies of why we do what we do. So this kind of represents our organizational structure around asset management. At the very top, there are things like financial cost models and policies, regulations. Climate adaptation is a new thing for us for sure that we have our eye on quite a bit. Integrated resource planning, so what's that 25-year, 50-year outlook look like? What does the system look like? What's the needs of the future? So all those things is what we call the mission for our assets and our system. So all that would feed into all the processes related down to our organizational structure, which we call asset management. So that's corporate strategies feeding into enterprise asset management thinking. So I thought that might be helpful just to understand the organization a little bit more. But at its core of what we do is the APM, what's APM's role, is around risk profiling. This is what we call the asset management mechanism. And this has been around almost as long as the pyramid, so almost a decade. But this is where we, in those asset class reliability teams, we think about capital spares, we think about refurbishing equipment, monitoring and diagnostics that we might need on the equipment, operational limitations. So as units near retirement, there are failure mechanisms in the turbines, for example, that we don't want to expose to, so we'll limit on the amount of starts and stops for a particular unit over time. So all that thinking comes from our reliability teams, and of course the maintenance strategy, which is at the bottom, operational surveillance, traditional PMs that everybody would have, advanced pattern recognition tools, PDM programs, and health assessments, which could be internal or external. So all that informs our condition. This risk profile is a mix of criticality by condition, gets us a maximum of 25, 5 by 5. And so this is done for every piece of equipment across our business. So then that just kind of continuously loops through to kind of talking about how are we going to mitigate the risks if it's high and what conditions have led to that decision making and help that conversation along. The other foundations of maintenance strategy, and I think everybody kind of gets this anyway, but moving from preventative maintenance or traditional preventative maintenance activities to something more closer to a digital strategy has always been a focus for us. How can we just do things better, monitor things in a different way, produce prognostics results so that we can get in and do the maintenance at the right time. And essentially, early detection leads to less cost in the end. So traditional ways just are more costly. So I'll skip now into some APM screens, hopefully, to show some of that monitoring of what we do. So we have several programs that we monitor from APM, starting with our rounds. So this would be for energy delivery. It wouldn't look all that much different for power production. But in the top left-hand corner, it just demonstrates kind of a compliance window to show month over month how are we doing at keeping up with our rounds program. The middle one would represent the current month, so we have a long way to go. So it just gives you a sense of how we're doing and how we're performing, what work's coming up, and keeping our eye to that. The other thing that's on this dashboard that is pulled out for energy delivery specifically are things around equipment leaking and weeping. So we track leaking and weeping through our rounds program, and we create visibility to it and monitor on the mitigating actions we take relative to the leaking equipment. So if something's making it to ground, what are we doing about it? So there's lots of environmental impacts for some of that for T&D for sure. So that's one of the GE screens. The other thing that we do on the power production side is monitor our NERC program for batteries. So we have maintenance activities for NERC. We need to comply to some of the NERC regulations for North America, and this is one way we can track that activity and make sure that we keep our eye on that ball. We also perform root cause failure analysis. We don't use the APM version of root cause. However, we track all of our mitigating actions or results of those RCAs within APM, and this would be one of those views where we can slice and dice it any which way to Sunday, really, showing by person or by plant or work group. We can show kind of what's outstanding, what's to come, and what risks we're carrying within that bucket. So next I'll move on to some of the policy manager stuff that we do. So we do have some content, and I know Francois was in the room, so you can thank him and our evolution. I think I'm excited about some of the stuff I saw in the sessions for sure, so I'm anxious to get onto the new models. But this would be an example of a transformer model in our energy delivery side. We have lots of others too on the power production side. I just want to pull this one out. It just shows the complexity that you can get into to talk about. Foran testing would be insulation, paper insulation testing that we do on our equipment, thermoelectrical testing and dissolved gas analysis readings going into APM, combining that with inspection data, whether it's manual inspections through rounds or oil analysis data, and putting all that together to produce an output. And what that output kind of looks like, or at least my output, not Francois' output, because his is much nicer now, but this is an output that kind of shows the remaining life on a transformer based on all that data. So it helps you kind of plan, get some condition, visibility into to transformer health, really. So it's a big key component for us. And we're looking forward to continue to work with GE on that. So just to kind of start down the risk path. So risk obviously was a foundational thing for us to consider over time, and we think about it in two different ways. We think about operational risk, and then I always coined it as engineered risk, because there's sometimes, and I think in the AI panel they mentioned you can't remove the engineer from the picture completely. So, and I think that's why I like to call it engineered risk. So there's some things you can calculate and some things need a little bit more subjectivity based on the experiences and other things around them to make the decisions that they make. So I'll start with the operational risk. So within APM, similar to the transformer models, we'll pull in data specific to the equipment and try to craft a formulated calculation of condition to produce a final risk score. And for this particular example, which I think is of air fans, this one has airborne ultrasonic testing, infrared, vibration analysis. We have manual inspections done by rounds, and then we have things like our PM compliance and backlog severity. So we review our work order history on the equipment and see, are we carrying a high backlog on that specific piece of equipment, which it's a little bit subjective too, but it can carry a bit of risk in it if you have outstanding work on that equipment. So we bake that into the calculation. So this is kind of what it looks like if we break it down. So we have what our PDM results are. We have work order backlog and severity by PMs, and then calculating out a condition. We times that by our criticality for the equipment and end up with our risk score. So as data is transforming in the system, that's happening automatically via policy execution. So the idea and the end result kind of looks like this. So within the product, we've developed a dashboard, which is a plant-centric one for now, which highlights the top 5 pieces of equipment or top risks at the plant And then they have the ability to drill in from different aspects to see specifically what's driving the risk score. So you can see with the list of conditions and criticalities and the risks all together, you can hyperlink over to the AHI, which will drive into what was used in the calculation of that risk. So it's helpful for things like weekly planning, if you're getting into advising weekly planning or trying to make better decisions on what work to do for the week. You can use things like this to help drive those decisions. So the next part I'm going to get into is a little bit of our reliability team, and that's our engineered risks. So that's the thing that takes a little bit more time and energy to put into creating a risk score. And before I start, I'll just talk about how we slice and dice that a little bit. So we talked about reliability teams. You saw the reliability team slide of how many we have. First filter that we created for some of this data is specifically the reliability team. So being able to filter down and get a list of the equipment specifically across the fleet that is for that team. So that's one. The next one is around taxonomy category, which comes from our work management system and things like rotating assets or electrical assets. So you can slice and dice it a little bit more and go a little bit deeper, and you can say, okay, within rotating, I want to see motors, and then within motors, I want to see 4160 volt motors. So it kind of builds that traceability back through your equipment hierarchy so that you can slice and dice the data whichever way you want. So then you end up with something like this, and this is something that Yusuf has been working on my team with to try to develop a little bit further, along with GE as well. But this is what we will use on a semi-annual basis to re-review our risk profiles to inform our investments. So this is similar to the last page, but this is our once a year feeding into our capital plan. That's what this is, so that's the difference. So looks a lot similar, but you get the Pareto of your risk score, you get the drill-in capabilities based on your filters, and then down below you have the ability to get in and change those scores. So as they're facilitating the meeting, the future of this will be to drive those conversations. So what is the condition this year based on all the things we know about that equipment, and we can change the score manually and set that in. And so that at the end of the day, you'll end up with a risk profile across that asset class that'll inform what investments you're going to make for that year. That was just demonstrating the drill in. So both those charts, you can drill in and get the short list of what equipment is specifically in that risk quadrant. So something else on the page is about mitigating actions. So in maintenance strategy, we talked about critical spares. We talked about maybe doing more monitoring and diagnostics, changing the frequency of our inspections. Any action really could be let's look at a new technology related to that particular asset class and go and do an engineering assessment or investigation. So we drive that out of this, and what you probably can't see is over onto the right-hand side, there's some hyperlinks around recommendations. So as we set the risk score, the conditions and risks, we can also add recommendations that help capture the actions that were taken to mitigate that risk.